Hi, I'm Kaylin Thomas, and this is Kathy Santora, and we're board members for the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, and we're also Maryland History Sleuths.
I also co-produced Dying to Tell Their Stories, a blog that explores the lives of people who are buried in Baltimore's historic cemeteries. Thank you to the Edgar Allan Poe House and Poe Baltimore for including the Maryland Women's Heritage Center in the Virginia Poe bicentennial celebration. It gives us a chance to do what we do best. We tell the stories of Maryland's women, past and present. We add her story to history to tell our story.
Today we're at Westminster Burying Ground at the southeast corner of West Fayette and North Green Streets here in Baltimore. It's the final resting place of Edgar Allan Poe. Each January, on his birthday, Poe fans turn out to pay their respects. It's a time-honored Baltimore tradition.
However, Virginia Poe and her mother, Maria, are also buried here in Westminster Burying Grounds. Today, Kaylin and I will talk about the lives of those two women, as well as virtually visit the grave sites of other women alive during Virginia Poe's lifetime.
Both Virginia and Maria had an enormous impact on Edgar Allan Poe and his writing, but unfortunately, many times they were overlooked.
We hope that the Virginia Poe bicentennial celebration will change that. Virginia, Maria, and all of the women that we visited today have made an enormous impact on Baltimore's history and have changed the course of our lives. The women whose grave sites we will visit were all alive at some point during Virginia Poe's lifetime. All fascinating, all different from one another, we remember them today along with Virginia and her mother, Maria. Edgar Allan Poe, destitute and estranged from his Virginia family, came to Baltimore around 1832 to live with his Aunt Maria Clemm at No. 3 Amity Street. Other family members lived there as well, including Maria's 10-year-old daughter, Virginia. The move changed the lives of Edgar, Maria, and Virginia. Maria was a plain and hard-working woman. She became a stabilizing influence on Edgar. In turn, Poe was devoted to her. Once the 27-year-old Poe infamously married Virginia when she was 13 years old, he took to calling Maria Muddy. Poe's 1849 poem, To My Mother, reflects their affection for each other. The marriage of these cousins with a startling age difference has been debated for years. We know that Virginia was a young woman of startling beauty, with dark hair and brilliant eyes. She herself wrote at least one poem, an ode to her husband, for Valentine's Day, 1846. Virginia possessed a memorable singing voice and played the harp and piano. One evening she was performing when she suddenly began bleeding from the mouth. It was a sign of the tuberculosis that would eventually end her life on January 30th, 1847. Poe was despondent and remained so for the rest of his life, sinking into alcoholism and, most think, madness. People in Baltimore never forgot the Poes. In 1875, this grave monument was dedicated to Edgar Allan Poe at Westminster Burying Ground. Later, Maria and Virginia were reinterred with him.
Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte is famous for her brief but famous marriage to European royalty. She was the daughter of a wealthy Baltimore merchant, as well as beautiful, educated, and charming. Perhaps it was all of these traits and her impeccable French that captivated Napoleon Bonaparte's 19-year-old brother Jerome when he met 18-year-old Elizabeth. Just months later, they were married. Napoleon was appalled by his brother's marriage to this Baltimore commoner. He withdrew Jerome's allowance and had the marriage annulled in French courts. Elizabeth never saw her husband again. For the rest of her life, Elizabeth refused to give up her aura of nobility. She traveled, dressed, socialized, and shopped with a European flair, and turned a temporary small pension paid by Napoleon into remarkable wealth. She remained forever bitter about her rejection by European royalty. As she aged, Elizabeth lived alone in a boarding house in Baltimore's Mount Vernon neighborhood. People often spotted her walking among her properties to collect rent. At her death in 1879, Elizabeth was worth about $1.5 million, a remarkable sum for a woman of those times.
By the time Harriet Lane was 11 years old, both of her parents had died. Harriet's uncle, James Buchanan, then a U.S. Senator, stepped in to become her guardian. Early on, James Buchanan recognized something special in his niece. He ensured that she got the best education. With his political future rising, he also encouraged Harriet's exposure to worldwide travel and politics. When Buchanan, a lifelong bachelor, became the 15th President of the United States, Harriet stepped into the role of First Lady from 1857 to 1861. She was 27 years old. Later, Harriet married Baltimore banker Henry Johnston. They were part of Baltimore's high society. However, the couple was devastated when both of their young sons died of rheumatic fever. The Johnstons later funded what would become the Harriet Lane Clinic, located in Johns Hopkins Hospital. It was the first hospital in the country devoted to children. Mrs. Johnston insisted that children from all ages, races, creeds, and nationalities have access to care. The Harriet Lane Clinic is still in Johns Hopkins Hospital. Each year on her birthday, pediatric nurses from the clinic place flowers on Harriet Lane Johnston's grave.
Martha Ann Atavus, also known as Patty, was born around 1816 and was a slave to William McCubbin. When he died, his widow sold Patty to Dr. John Whitridge for $200. The family lived at 49 North Charles Street in the vicinity of Charles Center today. For the rest of her life, Patty worked as a nurse for the family. She died in 1874. Patty was buried in the family plot in Greenmount Cemetery. The inscription reads, "A faithful and devoted nurse in the family of Dr. John Whitridge for over 36 years. However, it did not become clear that Ms. Atavus was a domestic slave until a remarkable discovery in the mid-2000s. A daguerreotype of Patty, as well as a tintype of her holding Alice Lee Whitridge, were discovered among items for auction in Sparks, Maryland. The lot also contained Patty's bill of sale. The Maryland Center for History and Culture purchased these items, and they are currently on exhibit. The images and the bill of sale serve as a reminder of the realities of urban slavery in Baltimore.
Mary Pickersgill was a 37-year-old widow who operated a flag-making business from her home near Fells Point. She most likely had enslaved people as well as indentured servants for labor support and for keeping the household running. Mary was awarded the contract to make the 30 by 42-foot garrison flag that would fly at nearby Fort McHenry. The flag was so large that it was laid out in a nearby brewery. Mary, her daughter, nieces, and other seamstresses worked late into the nights to meet the 7-week delivery deadline. Her workers included Grace Wisher, a 13-year-old African-American girl. The flag was delivered on time on August 19, 1813, a year before the bombardment of the fort, and when the flag would go down in history as the inspiration for our national anthem. Historians continue to research the story of all the women, black and white, free and not, who created the American flag at Fort McHenry.
Marie Ann Maxis came to Baltimore during the Haitian Revolution with the Duchemin family and became known as Betsy Duchemin. Around 1829, Betsy, a trained nurse, entered the new Oblate Sisters of Providence and became known as Sister Mary Anthony. In 1832, Baltimore was at the peak of the worldwide cholera epidemic. The Oblate sisters took care of many of the city's poor, including those living in the almshouse. Archbishop James Whitfield heard of her reputation and called for Sister Mary Anthony when he became ill with cholera. The archbishop recovered and asked her to return to take care of his housekeeper. But Sister Mary Anthony died from cholera within 24 hours. Sadly, the racism of the day prevailed in this story. None of the Black sisters were recognized for this devotion to duty during the pandemic. Instead, the white Sisters of Charity received accolades for their work for years. This history is only now being righted. There are indications that Sister Mary Anthony was buried in New Cathedral Cemetery. However, her final resting place has not been confirmed.
Elizabeth Lang was born around 1789 in what is now Haiti to a well-off family. She fled the country during a revolution and came to Baltimore, where many Catholic, French-speaking refugees had settled. Prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, there was no public education for blacks in Baltimore. She set up a school for black children in her Fells Point neighborhood home. In 1828, along with Father James Joubert, Elizabeth Lang and 2 other black women started the first black Catholic school in America. A year later, Elizabeth Lang, along with 3 other black women, pronounced vows to become the first religious order of women of African descent, the Oblate Sisters of Providence. She then became known as Sister Mary Elizabeth Lang. Despite discouragement, racism, and a lack of funds, Sister Mary Elizabeth continued to educate children and meet the needs of the black Catholic community. The Oblate Sisters also provided a home for orphans and education for freed slaves. They nursed the terminally ill during the 1832 cholera epidemic, sheltered the elderly, and even served as domestics at St. Mary's Seminary. Mother Mary Elizabeth Lang died on February 3, 1882. In 2013, her remains were exhumed from New Cathedral Cemetery on Old Frederick Road. She now rests at the Oblate Sisters of Providence Chapel.
Elizabeth Chalk was born in a Baltimore working-class family. Her father, Elias, worked as a mechanic and laborer at Landvale Factory in Jones Falls Valley. Elizabeth worked as a seamstress while living at home with 6 siblings. She later married Wilton S. Herring, a Northern Central Railway freight agent. The couple reared 3 children in Govinstown. In February 1819, Wilton Herring died suddenly, but this didn't stop Elizabeth from continuing to fight for several causes close to her heart. Herring was involved in many church organizations, but went on to national-level activism as a member of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. However, she also campaigned against the use of alcohol and cigarettes as a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. On June 26, 1926, she died and was later buried alongside her husband at Loudon Park Cemetery.
Asia Booth Clark was as shocked as the rest of the nation when she read the newspaper on April 15, 1865, to learn that her brother, John Wilkes Booth, was wanted for assassinating President Abraham Lincoln. Living in Philadelphia, at the time, she was pregnant with twins and confined to bed. Soon detectives appeared at their door. Asia's husband, John Clark, was taken to the old Capitol and detained. When Clark was released, he asked for a divorce, not wanting to be associated with the family of an assassin. The divorce didn't happen, but the marriage remained strained forever. The family never recovered their formerly good reputation. Asia and her family moved to England. She lost 3 more children. Her husband was unfaithful. She had health issues, and she missed her country. Asia was an author and poet and wrote John Wilkes Booth, a sister's memoir. a book that explored Booth's childhood and personality. It is prized as the only account of Lincoln's assassin that gives some insight into his upbringing. Asia is now buried with her husband in the Booth family plot in Greenmount Cemetery.
Jane Claudia Saunders was born into a politically connected family who lived on a southern plantation. She later became part of another politically connected family when she married Brigadier General Bradley T. Johnson of the 1st Maryland Regiment, CSA. In May of 1861, about 500 Maryland men went to Point of Rocks, Maryland, and Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, to be sworn into the Confederate States Army as the 1st Maryland Regiment. They had few supplies and weapons, since Maryland had not left the Union. So Mrs. Johnson volunteered to return to her native North Carolina to raise money for her husband's regiment and the Confederate cause. Throughout the war, Mrs. Johnson followed her husband to his various army camps throughout Virginia. She provided social activities for the soldiers, including dances with the local young ladies, theatricals, and choral productions. She maintained a reading library and worked with traveling pastors and priests to make sure that her husband's troops worshiped on Sunday. Jane Claudia Johnson died on December 31st, 1899. Her headstone includes a tribute by Confederate soldiers in Maryland entitled "In Memory of a Noble Woman."
Judith Solomon Cohen was the matriarch of one of the earliest Jewish families in Baltimore. She and husband Israel had immigrated from England to Richmond, where he worked as a constable. When Israel died in 1803, the house and belongings were auctioned off, since women were not allowed to own property in Virginia. Judith moved to Baltimore with a goal in mind. She wanted her 6 sons and 1 daughter to get good educations. At the time, the state of Virginia also refused higher education to people who were Jewish. The education that Judith's children received helped make them an incredibly influential force in Baltimore. Jacob founded a bank, was president of the city council, and a director of the B&O Railroad. Mendez became a noted archaeologist and donated his antiquities to Johns Hopkins University. Benjamin and David helped found the Baltimore Stock Exchange. Joshua was a pioneer ear specialist. Philip became a postmaster in Norfolk, Virginia. The following generations of Cohens produced many more Baltimore luminaries. The family and most descendants are buried or memorialized in Baltimore Hebrew Cemetery in a family plot that contains a memorial to Judith and her husband and dozens of small footstones that represent the generations. Every single person who is buried in Baltimore's historic cemeteries have shaped our city as it is today. We may not know their names, but we're grateful to the contributions they've made to Baltimore's history.
We honor Virginia and Maria Poe and all of these women for how they added to the fabric of Baltimore history.
We all want to be remembered. At the Maryland Women's Heritage Center, we work hard to do that for Maryland's women, both past and present.